She sat there, her voice trembling, eyes wet with years of silent heartbreak, and said the words no one expected to hear. Everything about me was wrong. That one line shattered the illusion that Meri Brown had held it all together. It wasn't just a confession. It was the sound of decades of pain finally breaking free. For so long, Meri seemed strong, calm, and collected, the loyal first wife who carried herself with quiet dignity even as her world slowly crumbled. But behind that strength was a woman who had been taught to endure, to accept, and to keep believing even when her heart begged her to stop. Hey everyone, this is Sarah, and welcome back to my channel. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because today, we're diving into one of the most heartbreaking and revealing moments in the Sister Wives story. Meri Brown's emotional breakdown and the painful truth that has followed her for years. For those who have watched her journey, Meri's story has always carried a strange kind of silence. She was the first to marry Kody, the one who built the foundation of what would become a massive, complex family. Yet, over time, she became invisible in her own marriage, left behind while others took her place in both love and importance. Her smile told the world she was fine, but her eyes told another story. This was a woman trapped in a system that demanded sacrifice, that told her love meant pain and faith meant endurance. When Meri said she believed everything about her was wrong, it wasn't self-pity, it was revelation. It was the moment she finally admitted what so many women in similar situations are afraid to say out loud: that living for someone else's version of happiness can destroy your own. Each new wife in the family added another layer of distance between her and Kody. What began as a shared dream of eternal unity turned into a slow erasure of self. But this isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's a story about awakening. Meri's quiet suffering mirrors something far bigger than one broken marriage. It exposes the cost of endurance, the emotional weight of believing that your pain is somehow a virtue, and the spiritual confusion that comes from loving someone who stopped loving you long ago. And yet, just when she thought she had finally buried all those feelings, a discovery pulled her right back into the past. A forgotten letter, hidden for years, waiting like a ghost to be found. What was written inside that letter would shake her to her core and force her to face everything she had tried so hard to forget. The story of that letter and the emotions it unleashed would change everything for Meri Brown. In the spring of 1990, Meri stood at the altar of a dream. She was young, filled with hope, believing in love and faith. At just 19, she married Kody Brown, seeing in him more than a husband, a partner, an eternal covenant, someone with whom she would build a life anchored in promise. Back then, the world felt open and right. She walked into their home, believing their union could hold everything together: devotion, children, a future echoing forever. In those early days, Mary's voice rang clear with certainty. This was meant to be. She laughed easily then, unburdened by the shadows that would grow around her. She and Kody had that quiet closeness of two people on the same page. Shared glances, whispered hopes, the brightness of a new marriage. She believed in the ideals of her faith, the idea that love would endure, that commitment meant steadfastness, and that any challenge could be faced if they stood together. Her faith and love merged into one conviction: we are bound for eternity. But slowly, the foundation began to tremble. The first tremor arrived in 1993 when Janelle entered the picture. She was not just a newcomer, she was transformation. The marriage that once held Meri and Kody exclusively now expanded. Meri, who had believed herself secure in her role, found the ground shifting beneath her feet. She sensed it quietly at first. A glance, a smile shared in a way that used to be hers. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. She tried to cling to her belief that love was enough. Then, in 1994, Christine arrived. The change accelerated. The circle widened. Meri watched as another presence became central in the home she had built with hope. By 2010, with Robin joining, the pattern was clear. Each new wife brought more than companionship. They brought a new reality to Meri's dream. The union she had trusted to be her refuge now held others in its core. Her sense of belonging began to erode. Jealousy crept in, not like a sudden storm, but as a quiet ache. She asked herself, "Why am I feeling this? What is wrong with me?" She convinced herself she must be defective. She told herself, "It's my fault. If only I were different, more patient, stronger, more cheerful, then this wouldn't hurt so much." Every time she sensed Kody's affection shift, she folded it inward. She blamed herself. She polished her smile, adjusted her posture, tried to be the first wife who never complained, who endured quietly. She believed that duty and faith required her silence. But love and duty can't always drown sorrow. Within her, the tension grew. There was love for the husband she chose, duty to the family they created, and heartbreak at the loss of what she believed marriage to be. She loved deeply, but the version of love she bought into began to betray her. She served the home, she stood firm, she held on, but inside, the roots were rotting. Her faith told her to endure. Her heart told her to run, or at least to be seen. In those years, Meri's dream looked perfect from the outside. But inside, each addition of a wife chipped away at what felt like a home built for two. What had begun as a hopeful beginning had shifted into the quiet reality of being first in title, but second in attention. Her voice faded while her expectation stayed loud. She believed she was doing things the right way, yet the system she believed in began to unravel around her. By the time she realized how far the dream had drifted, she was standing in the ruins of something she never knew she was losing. And yet she stayed, because she had faith, because she had hope, because she believed enduring pain would one day mean something. For years, Meri believed endurance was love's highest form. In her world, to hurt and stay was proof of faith. That belief became her compass, even as it led her straight into heartbreak. When things grew difficult, she didn't complain, she prayed harder. When the distance between her and Kody widened, she filled the silence with forgiveness. Her heart was breaking, but she told herself this pain had purpose. She was taught that true devotion meant holding on, no matter how much it hurt. So she did. She held on when the warmth faded, when conversations turned cold, and when the eyes that once looked at her with affection now looked past her. In her faith community, endurance was seen as strength, even holiness. Endure to the end wasn't just a saying, it was a way of life. It meant staying when your spirit wanted to flee, smiling when you were falling apart, and believing that your suffering would somehow be rewarded. For Meri, this belief became a cage disguised as virtue. Each time she felt invisible, she whispered that maybe this was her test, her trial to prove devotion. She told herself, this is what faith looks like. But deep inside, she began to vanish. To the world, she appeared calm, even cheerful. Fans saw her as the composed one, the steady foundation, the wife who could handle anything. Cameras caught her smiles, her polite nods, her careful laughter. But when the lights went out, she sat alone with a silence that felt endless. She'd built a habit of hiding her storm. Each morning she put on that brave face, the same one she wore at family gatherings, the same one she wore when others talked about love and partnership, as if those words still meant something. The emotional collapse came quietly, not in one dramatic moment, but through years of pretending. The breaking point arrived in 2014 when Kody told her he needed a legal divorce. Not to end their relationship, he said, but to marry Robin and adopt her children. It was supposed to be a formality, a piece of paper, but to Meri it was an earthquake. She smiled through the announcement, agreeing publicly that it was the right thing to do, that it was for the good of the family. Inside, her heart splintered. That technicality ended more than a marriage. It stripped away her last sense of importance. For decades, she had been the first wife, the one who started it all. That title carried weight, even as her emotional place diminished. But the day the papers were signed, she wasn't first anymore. She wasn't even sure who she was. When Kody remarried, something inside her went still. She told herself it was fine, that her love was strong enough to survive this. But something inside whispered that maybe she had mistaken loyalty for love. After that, she withdrew further into herself. The woman who once smiled freely now smiled only out of habit. Every kind gesture felt mechanical, every laugh forced. She looked at her reflection and saw a stranger, someone who had given everything and become invisible in return. Her belief that endurance was sacred had turned into quiet destruction. Late at night, when the house was dark and her thoughts refused to rest, she'd whisper the words she once feared to say out loud. Everything about me was wrong. Not because she truly believed it, but because that was how the years of silent sacrifice made her feel. She had been told that enduring pain would lead to peace. Instead, it led her here, alone, hollow, still trying to find where the line between faith and self-forgetting truly ended. And as she sat there in that stillness, she began to sense that her story wasn't over, but it would no longer be told on someone else's terms. It was one of those quiet afternoons when silence felt heavier than sound. The desert wind pressed gently against the window of Meri's house in Utah, carrying a kind of stillness that only comes after years of noise. She wasn't searching for anything in particular, just tidying up, she told herself. Old boxes, forgotten papers, traces of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. But when her hand brushed against a small envelope tucked between photo albums, the air seemed to change. The handwriting stopped her cold, familiar, curved in a way she hadn't seen in years. Kody's handwriting. She froze, heart quickening. For a moment, she thought about putting it back, sealing the past inside its dusty tomb. But curiosity, or maybe courage, made her unfold it. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the words were sharp, almost cruel in their kindness. Meri, I know things have been hard, but I believe we can rebuild what we've lost. You're my partner, my beginning. Let's find our way back. She read it once, then again, her eyes tracing the sentences as if they might change. Each line was a ghost, whispering from a time when she still believed him, when she still believed love could be repaired by faith alone. The words were drenched in the hope of two people who thought they could outlast everything. But hope, she realized now, can be a trickster. It keeps you waiting long after the dream has died. Her fingers trembled as she held the page. She remembered the man who had written those words, his confidence, his charm, his conviction that God had blessed every decision he made. And she remembered the woman who had received them, eager, trusting, desperate for reassurance. That woman had cried over this very letter once, clutching it like a lifeline. Now, all she felt was a strange, quiet numbness. There was no anger left, just an ache that had worn itself smooth. She folded the letter gently, as if handling the remains of a love that had already turned to dust. Around her were other fragments of their life, family photos, souvenirs from the early days of sister wives, mementos from anniversaries that had once meant something. She looked at each piece and felt a mix of tenderness and grief. It wasn't hatred that filled her, it was absence, the kind that doesn't scream, just echoes. As the sun dipped lower, the room glowed with that late golden light that makes everything look softer, almost merciful. Meri stared out the window, letter still in her hand, realizing that she wasn't mourning him anymore. She was mourning the version of herself who had lived for his promises. The man who wrote that letter didn't exist anymore, not to her. Maybe he never truly had. And the woman who had waited for him, prayed for him, endured for him, she was gone too. What remained was someone quieter but stronger, someone who understood that closure doesn't always come with peace. Sometimes it comes with a folded letter and a long exhale. She placed the letter back in the box, not as a keepsake, but as a marker, a reminder that the past no longer owned her. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you for showing me who I was and who I'm not anymore." As the last light faded, Meri closed the box and stood in the hush of the evening. For the first time in years, the ghosts were finally still. Christine sat across from the camera, her voice calm but weighted with years of exhaustion. There was something in her tone that struck Meri, not anger, not bitterness, but clarity. Christine spoke about what it truly meant to live in a family built on the idea of enduring pain for a higher purpose. She said she once believed that being a good wife meant sacrificing everything: her time, her needs, her heart. But now, she said quietly, enduring pain doesn't make you holy, it just makes you hurt. Those words hung in the air like a mirror, reflecting straight back at Meri. She'd lived by that same rule for decades, convincing herself that if she stayed loyal, patient, and faithful enough, something would change. She thought pain was proof of commitment. But sitting there, hearing Christine's voice tremble with both truth and relief, she realized how many women had been taught that same lie. Christine's story wasn't one of defiance. It was one of survival. She had spent years smiling through heartache, raising children in a house full of unspoken rivalries and quiet disappointments. She had loved Kody once, deeply, the way only someone who believes in forever can love. But forever had turned into fragments, each new wife carving out another piece of what used to feel like home. When she finally decided to leave, Christine said she didn't feel powerful. She felt terrified. But peace, she said, comes when you stop fighting for a love that only exists in your imagination. And when she spoke about that peace, of waking up without dread, of laughing freely again, it was like the sound of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Meri watched that moment play out on screen, and something inside her stirred. Christine's courage wasn't loud or theatrical. It was quiet and honest. It was the kind of bravery that comes after years of silence. Meri understood it because she had lived that silence herself. The two women hadn't always been close. Jealousy and tension had often kept them apart. Yet, in this moment, their stories were bound together, not by rivalry, but by recognition. Meri remembered her own moments of pretending to be fine. The public smiles, the polite interviews, the practiced grace. And now, hearing Christine's confession, she realized how many layers of herself she had buried just to keep the peace. She thought of all the times she prayed for strength, when what she really needed was permission to stop hurting. Christine's choice to walk away wasn't betrayal, it was truth. And for the first time, Meri could see that truth without resentment. Christine had chosen joy, while Meri had chosen endurance. But now, endurance felt hollow, like a song she no longer believed in. The more she thought about it, the more she understood that suffering had never been sacred. It had simply been familiar. It was what they were taught to do, what they were praised for doing. But holiness, Meri thought, shouldn't come from pain. It should come from love. Love for others, yes, but also for yourself. That night, Meri sat alone, reflecting on Christine's words. The anger, the confusion, the sadness. They were still there, but softer somehow. Beneath them was something new. It wasn't joy yet, but it was close. It was the faint sound of freedom, one that Christine had already stepped into, and that Meri was just beginning to hear. They were two women on different paths, but both walking toward the same truth. That liberation isn't rebellion, it's healing. And maybe, after all the heartbreak and the years of endurance, that healing was the truest kind of faith either of them would ever know. The world didn't stop when Meri left Flagstaff. It just became quieter, simpler, freer in ways she hadn't expected. There were no more long conversations that ended in tears, no more nights wondering what she had done wrong. For the first time in decades, the silence belonged to her. When she decided to move to Utah, it wasn't just about geography, it was about identity. That stretch of land, with its open skies and distant red cliffs, felt like home in a way her old life never had. It was where she could breathe again, where she could begin to rebuild, not as Kody's wife or as one of the sister wives, but as Meri Brown, an individual with dreams, purpose, and quiet power. Starting over wasn't easy. There were mornings when loneliness slipped through the cracks, reminding her of what she'd lost, or perhaps what she had survived. But every time she stepped into her bed and breakfast, every time she met a new guest or signed another order for her clothing line, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about belonging to herself. The Meri who once begged for validation had learned to find it within. She no longer needed Kody's approval, nor did she measure her worth by his attention. That need had evaporated with time and truth. Letting go wasn't weakness, it was freedom, and fans saw it too. They wrote messages filled with encouragement and pride, telling her that her story reminded them of their own, of marriages that broke, of faith that faltered, of strength they didn't know they had. To them, Meri wasn't just a reality star anymore. She was a mirror of resilience. She had walked through fire and come out steady, her scars no longer symbols of shame but of survival. Meri rarely responded publicly, but she read every word. Sometimes she smiled at how much the audience had seen her heart, even when she tried to hide it. Other times, she simply sat with gratitude, realizing that her pain had somehow turned into someone else's permission to heal. Across the miles, Christine was laughing again, her joy radiating in ways that made others feel lighter just watching her. Janelle, steady and thoughtful, had built her own independence, quietly showing that strength didn't need to shout. And together, even apart, these women had redefined what family could mean after the breaking. They no longer fit the mold of the life they were born into, and maybe that was the point. Their faith had changed, their love had changed, but the essence of who they were, the parts that had always been strong, kind, and resilient, had finally taken root in freedom. Meri began sharing glimpses of her new life online. Hikes in the mountains, sunsets over Utah, moments of calm that spoke louder than any confession. There was a new light in her, not the forced brightness of pretending, but the steady glow of peace. One evening, standing outside her inn, she watched the sun melt behind the cliffs, painting the horizon gold. The letter, the heartbreak, the years of endurance, they all felt distant now, like chapters from a story that had finally found its ending. She thought about Christine's laughter, Janelle's strength, and her own quiet determination, and she smiled. This wasn't the ending she once imagined, but it was the one she needed. Freedom wasn't loud. It didn't need to be announced or explained. It was simply the ability to stand in the stillness of your own truth and know you made it. And in that moment, Meri didn't feel broken anymore. She felt whole. There was a time when Meri believed every word she once said through tears. Everything about me was wrong. Those words had haunted her like a shadow, the kind that follows you no matter how bright the sun gets. But now, years later, she could finally see how untrue they were. She had never been wrong. She had just been unheard. Silenced by expectation, molded by a belief that her pain was a kind of devotion. She wasn't broken. She was simply buried under years of trying to be who someone else needed her to be. When she looked back now, she saw the woman she used to be, the one who waited, endured, and cried quietly so no one would see. And instead of pity, she felt compassion. That woman had been strong in her own way. She had survived the impossible and held herself together when love had already let go. The letter still sat in the box she'd found it in, carefully folded. She didn't throw it away. She didn't need to. It no longer had power over her. Instead, it was proof of distance, of how far she had traveled from the version of herself who once believed that endurance was love. That letter was the closing of a door that didn't need slamming, just quiet acceptance. Sometimes, healing doesn't come with fireworks or grand revelations. It comes with peace, steady, unshakable, and earned. It's the kind of peace that lets you sit alone without feeling lonely. The kind that reminds you that even the deepest heartbreak can teach you something sacred about who you are. Meri had finally found that peace. She had forgiven herself for staying too long, for hoping too much, for believing too deeply in someone who stopped believing in her. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing the weight she'd carried for years. And in that release, she rediscovered something she hadn't felt in a long time: joy. The quiet kind that doesn't need attention. The kind that lives in laughter with friends, in sunsets over the Utah hills, in mornings when she wakes up and feels light instead of lost. Meri's story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about reclamation. It's about finding strength in stillness and beauty in the act of walking away from what hurts you. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply choose yourself. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I'm Sarah, and this is Channel, where we honor stories of strength, truth, and transformation. If Meri's story touched your heart, tell me in the comments what part resonated with you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, because every week we share more real, emotional stories that remind us how healing always begins when we find the courage to let go.